We have Scott Fedje, Creative Director for Tank Design. Next to him is Chuck Baker, co-founder or founder and CEO of BlazeStage. Next to him is Gabriele Pansa, Gabriele Pansa from Theneeds. Next to him is Richard Titus, who has many, many titles, but we'll just go with promptly, founder promptly, and my girl Sarah Buhr from the USA Today. And our moderator is Newland, who is a great writer, blogger, and we'll go from there.
Sean, thank you very much. Thank you all very much for coming this evening. We have 45 minutes for the panel discussion, then we're going to have just Q&A. As the conversation discussion goes on this evening, if you've got questions, if you've got things you want to talk about, raise your hand and I'll try and actually bring you into the conversation. We want to have this as interactive as possible. Sean, thank you very much for the introduction. So with that, I'm going to jump straight into the questions that were listed. So, Sarah, who would you say the product storytellers are?
The product storytellers?
Yes. And why? How are they important?
Okay, so I need a little elaboration. Do you mean brands or product storytellers?
So if you're bringing a product up,
Can you? Is this not on? Is this not on? Maybe it needs to be closer to my mouth. Does that work better?
Yeah, a little louder.
A little bit louder. That's good. Right here. Okay. Gotta make sure. Okay.
Okay, Sarah. Okay, Sarah. So you see a lot of products, you see a lot of brands. They're coming to you with their story.
Right.
Do you think they've actually made the product first, or have they put the design on top? And how important is that when you're looking at the product?
Right. So that's actually a really good question. As you can imagine, I often get a lot of pitches, and the ones that succeed are they have a very clear message on how they help other people or what they actually do. And behind that is always a story. I mean, to get into a journalist's head, you have to be thinking of what is the story that they might possibly write. And that's a little bit tricky if you, sorry, I'm just going to hold this. It'll make me hold this. So the best pitches that I get, I already have thought about what's in my head, what I might possibly be writing, and can tell me a story about that product, rather than, hey, I have this startup you've never heard of, please write about me. I'm going to tell you almost nothing. I've gotten pitches from very vague, thinking that they're going to like trick me and it's going to be this amazing thing, it's this mysterious thing. I don't have time for that. So if you can actually tell me a story, get inside my head, pay attention to what I'm actually writing about, then that's you've hit the nail.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Richard, I'm going to throw that to you.
So I think it's interesting. Design, product design, it's a religious thing. You're either an engineer and you view things from a functionality or capabilities, and then you design as sort of the enablement of the human-computer interface. That's my father actually was an engineer and did call what I did human-computer interface work. Or if you're like me and you come from a user experience or a product development background, you
Hey
think
Richard,
about,
let me can you speak into the mic or yell?
It's yell. Can everyone just hear me?
Right on there.
If you hold it like that more.
Right? Like that? Does it work? I don't think it works at all.
Is it on?
Okay, I'll just talk about it. Can everyone hear me?
It works. Put it right to your mouth.
Now, oh, hey. So, product development and product design is very much more religion and less science in the sense of how people view it. If you're an engineer or someone from a technical background, you often view things as capabilities or functionalities or interfaces or APIs. If you come from, as I did, my father was an engineer and he looked at the world through sort of the spec first. You built these giant books of the spec, and then you went and in the very, very, very end you might put a bit of design around thinking about human-computer interfaces was how I described it. Or if you're like me and you come from a user experience and a design background, you think very much about who's the user. And we actually even work at Promptly, my newest startup, where we actually design everything in wireframes that are pretty well-articulated wireframes before we actually go. We even user test those wireframes and test the thesis before we go and write any code. Part of that's also because today, writing and rewriting code is no longer sort of the big impact it used to be in building a product or a service. But I think I agree, you really have to know first and foremost why you're building something and who is it going to benefit and what do they need before you do anything else. And that needs to be owned by whoever the product owner is.
So Gabe, you've just launched an app.
Yeah.
Who are the product storytellers within your company, and how's that develop the product, and how are you conveying that?
Well, I think that any product probably starts with a story, which is usually a personal story. We started with our a pain that we felt with the current online experience, and then the second step is probably to think about the solution you want to bring and the functionality you're going to build. Then it's where design come in. Design is the way functionality is probably the way what you need in terms of function, in terms of service. And then design is what actually make people enjoy the product and have a wonderful experience about it. So you make your people adapt your product and come back. So that's what design is about. Design is about creating a great user experience. It's something that makes your product enjoyable. So I mean, for us, our personal story is that we started with with a clear picture of what we wanted in terms of functionality, and then we learned that we were completely wrong in terms of how we were presenting the result of our amazing technology. So we built a great technology, and then we started working, thinking about how to present the result. So when we launched our, alpha version of the product, last spring, we just got, the feeling, the result was that we were the only one understanding what we were doing, right? So the feedback was like, awesome, we love the idea, but we cannot understand your product, right? So we went back to the, to the board, and we just started, we sit down with probably 100 people, gathering, collecting their feedback and, their thoughts about the product. And we, rebuilt it completely, from scratch. Not in terms of technology, but in terms of, user interface and user experience. It was just too complicated, So this is what it's about.
So Jack, your product's all about enabling people to share and communicate what they're trying to do. Who would you say the digital storytellers were?
First, I'm just excited to be here. This is a really cool place and really cool people, so thank you, Sean. It's interesting when you say the product storyteller, I hear the two words product, which to me thinks commercial versus art, right? So the end game is to sell something. When I hear storytelling, I think about the messenger, right? But I think if you back up and look at design, you think of the user, right? So let's just start with the word user, because that's the category we're in, and then we'll talk about the storytellers, and then we'll talk about making money. I think the user is really what drives design. The user experience drives the functionality of design. And so if you always think about the process being collaborative and iterative, then you go ahead and put things out there. Hopefully you have experience in the sector that you're building the product in. So if you're trying to disrupt transportation, hopefully you might be a cab driver, right? Or at least you know that industry a little bit, so that you know the pain points. So you can put yourself in the shoes of the customer or the user as a premise. And then you hopefully know something about the pain points, and then you can start to think about solving those pain points. And then I think design comes in when you think about how to make those pain points most efficiently solved or solvable, right? And that is the simplicity factor of design. I think the sexy factor of design comes in later when you have the raw materials of functionality, and then you start putting sort of the makeup and the hair on it and say, okay, I want to make sure that it, it competes on a global scale from a professionalism standpoint or a cool standpoint. But that's sort of how we look at it. From the standpoint of making money, the product, my background is in Procter & Gamble, and we've pretty much, I was in brand, and the premise there was, come up with an idea, and then test it, and then come up with an ad, and test it, and then we'll spend $1 billion once it works, right? And so they had these 2-year cycles, and you were just like, okay, today, we're gonna do another test, that kind of thing. You can't do that now, and Procter & Gamble actually is trying to disrupt their own business model because the brand now is dynamic to the user. And so you have to be really fast, and you have to get those learnings. And so as you're designing a product to make money, the customer and the user is going to, I think, give you the answer and say, I'll be willing to pay for that, or I'm never going to pay for that, but I'll use it, and maybe there's another business model. With respect to the storyteller, that to me is even more interesting because there's so much noise, right? When you get to the media, that's a story you have to tell. You have to simplify it, dumb it down. When you're telling it to an investor, you got to dumb it down, but you have to show them how much money you're going to make, right? If you're talking to a customer, you have to be like, look how cool we are, look how simple we are. So I think the storytellers are diverse, and to the extent that you can identify who the storytellers are to deliver the message to the right person using technology and data, then hopefully you can create a model that can be responsive to whatever message you're trying to deliver to the right person.
So Richard, you have a design agency. Obviously a lot of the time it's, Scott. We should get that right, you're Richard. So you have a design agency. So often people have got the product before they come to you, or do people actually come to you as they're developing the product?
Well, I'd say the majority of the work that we do is with people that already have a product, and they come to us because they need to figure out what that brand narrative is. They might have an idea of what their strategy is, but what we end up doing quite a bit is working with people on what the strategy, whether it's go-to-market, or it's a communication digitally, or they're going to have a physical experience of their brand. That's when we define the different aspects of that. But there is one client I've been working with for the last 2 years on developing a new brand. It's actually hasn't launched yet, so I can't talk about who it is, but it's a health and fitness brand in South America. And what was great about the project was the first year we really worked with them on what the brand narrative was. So simultaneously we were able to work with them on what should the brand mean to their customer, as they were developing what the actual products would be that they were going to sell. So we actually were able to work with them on influencing health and fitness. So it was weight management, vitamins, and sport nutrition. And over the course of developing what this brand narrative was, we actually determined that weight management would become the most significant part of the program over the other categories, just in the development and research and what the brand really wanted to mean to the customers that they were going after. So there are those occasions where you get to work on the product itself, but it's rather rare.
So within that process, who are the interested parties and who are the gatekeepers?
In that particular
Well,
exercise?
in that project, but also where do you see that?
Well, I think it's most successful when you have strong product people working with a marketing team or a brand team. When they work in silos, I think it always looks a little superficial as an end result, whether it's the innards or the skin. If they weren't really spawned together, it doesn't really come off as an authentic product story, and that therefore reflects on a brand the same way. So I do think the most successful way is to have product people working with the brand people and really understanding that from the beginning.
So Chuck, you recently released your product. How did that come about? Obviously you have a team of software developers, you have a design team, other people leading it from marketing, let's say. Who are the gatekeepers and what's the process there?
That's a great question. To me, the gatekeepers are the users, right? And I never try to make decisions based on functionality or design without talking to people that really understand the user that we're trying to reach. And so I'll reach out in the middle of the night and just say, what do you think about this? What's on the street? For instance, one of our key targets is musicians and filmmakers. So I talk to musicians and filmmakers and editors and videographers, and I live in the studio and just listen to them, right? And this is years, right? But so I have a basis of what's going on as I enter the decision, but the gatekeeper ultimately is the person that hopefully is testing it or using it, that's giving you feedback to say, you know what, I don't like this, or wow, I'm onto something. And typically, if you're really listening to the user and you can get something out in the market quickly, they become the gatekeeper. The investor, a lot of times, unfortunately, or the person that you're reporting to, whoever that might be, the board, can say, hey, I like this or I like that, and I think this, and I'm a VC, and I'm going to say this, and this is the trend, and you have to be careful of that. Because if they're not steeped into the user experience, you might just miss the whole thing, and you might not be disruptive, you might be late. So the user to me is the ultimate gatekeeper.
I think it's probably, it's a teamwork. So, engineering, product design, and even business should work together. To make sure that all the key aspects of the product are covered to deliver, something which is like that you can monetize at the end, but something that user can actually use. And so I think, and then you should take into consideration, all the feedback from users. That's the main thing. If you leave work, I know it's not something politically correct, but if you leave, engineers, work alone, I think they lack, sometimes they can lack, vision and, the big picture. They are probably too focused on showing up or on building the best technology. And if you don't bring, some business people on the table, you miss, how you will actually, monetize your product. And design, again, is what makes, everything like, enjoyable. So I would say that the gatekeepers are, the team, the whole team, and, the users at the end.
So who are the gatekeepers? It's an interesting question. Like I've been going through this right now in my current startup, which is there's the process of building a new product and then testing with customers and then taking that feedback back into a company and iterate. It's very challenging actually to figure out what stays in, what goes out. And I think that in some ways, many companies fail because they don't take that processing and make it a loop. So many companies put something out, they watch some users, and meanwhile internally the dev team is like, oh, we love our product, but we wish it did these 10 things, and they go and they build them, and they ship that version. And never taking back into account what happened when the first version hit the audiences with users and how users interface with that first product. And believe it or not, this happens at very big companies as well as little companies. At the BBC, we had a product called iPlayer. It was sort of like Netflix, but it was free and it was all the content of the BBC. And there was an interface mechanism which involved the channel brands, which is like Channel 2, Channel 3, Channel 4. And this was this really big piece of real estate in the interface. And I went to speak to the head of television and said, why is this here? And she said, well, that's how people find content. And I said, oh, okay. So we went back and we ran a piece of software to tell us how many people had ever clicked on these links. And it turned out a lot of people had. Except if you took out all the IPs from within the BBC networks, 0 people had ever clicked on that link. It was how the people who worked at the BBC found programs on the iPlayer. Not actually how any users, i.e. the people who paid the license fee who wanted to consume the content, how they use the product. So what's really interesting, and the reason I told that story is, the gatekeeper needs to be, as he said, the audience, but someone needs to process the information from that gatekeeper to make sure you take the right answer. Because had we just stopped with how many people click on it, we would never have discovered that we were wasting this massive chunk of our real estate, our navigational real estate, doing something that no user actually ever wants to do.
So who do you see out there doing well iterating the product, and how do you see that developing?
That's a really good question. I actually have this little,
Yeah, that's right.
I'm good right here. I think I'm good here. I had a million examples before I came here on what I would say and who's really doing a really good job. There's obviously several companies doing a really good job and several companies that harp on the wrong message, but I think overall, without really, there's a million different companies you can kind of point to, but I think overall when you focus on, here tonight, we're all representing different things. We're all saying we're this way, we live a certain way online, we have our own story about ourselves, we have our own story about our company, and when you can really suss out who you are in an authentic way and kind of I wouldn't say dumb it down, but simplify it to help people understand the message you're trying to come across, I think you're going to come across, people are going to understand who you are and what your message is. It's going to be a lot more clear than, I mean, I've seen a lot of different brands who are all over the place. They position themselves wrong. They pitch themselves the wrong way, and that's not really what their technology did. They didn't really understand what people were actually looking for, and it gets lost. You know, I've seen journalists write things about companies, and that's not really what their technology does, even just because of the way it was pitched. So crafting that message, getting that right message, and understanding what it is that this thing can actually do and what the use case actually is for it and what the benefit actually is critical.
So, companies go through redesigns all the time. People pitch you all the time. How can a company who's maybe gone through a redesign actually make that of interest to you and your readers? Like if someone actually wants to pitch you and get you to write about them, presumably you want to write about something that's going to be super interesting for your readers.
Right.
How do they make that story happen? How do they create that? Why would you be interested in it? Would you be interested in it?
That's a really good question.
I'm trying.
You're making me think, man.
Uh-oh.
Stop. How would they go about?
Yeah, I mean, why would a redesign be of interest? How would it be?
Okay, so if a company seriously looked at what their users were saying and what people out in the internet were saying about their company, and they actually paid attention to that, that's amazing.
That would shock you.
That would shock me. People do that all the time. They pivot all the time. They change the product. They improve the product all the time. And I would say that's a really good team to get behind and work with, because not everyone has that luxury. And everyone has a different opinion on how things should go. But when a company can actually do that and change and listen to people, and I mean, there's one company I'm under NDA I can't talk about, but I really want to, actually, that I'm thinking of right now. I'll just say it's a camera company, you might all know, but I'm not going to say anything about it. But they're really good at listening to people and changing for the better, and I think it's saving their company. And when you can come back to me and say, look, we have done this. We've listened to everyone who says this is what we should be doing, and this is going to change our company and revolutionize what we're actually doing. I definitely am going to pay attention to that. I mean, if it's a better product and it has a better use in the in the system, and people love it, and I haven't heard from them for a while, and it's something new, definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Richard, how would you go about starting a new brand?
So it's interesting. In the old days of brands, in fact, when I founded a company called Razorfish, we used to spend 3-6 months a year.
For those that don't know, Razorfish is a global
It's the largest interactive agency on the planet. So in those days, we spent, and I know you experience this pain all the time, we spent massive amounts of time crafting very carefully everything about the brand, the messaging, the story behind it. And what's fascinating to me is that now, today, when companies come up with brands, that process almost doesn't exist most of the time. It's like 3 guys in a garage. They come up with a name, they check if the URL's free. If it is, they use the name. They usually go through a couple different, 99 designs for a logo. Someone picks some colors because they like green. And it's terrible, but that's what happens, right? And then,
Oh yeah.
and then, I'm not saying my company did that, but our color is green. And the fact is that at some point, it's really the idea of brand. In the old days, we at Razorfish, as these digital pioneers, thought of brand as color, typeface, tagline, maybe some messaging. But what really happened is simultaneously, all this stuff around product development and product design happened, where the experience of someone using a piece of software is as or more important than the typeface or the color. And so actually what's happened is more people are involved in the development of a brand than ever before, and branding is not this thing that happens over here in a weird silo far, far away from the people doing the actual work on the product. It's actually become incredibly integrated. But what's interesting is we don't use that word brand, I think, nearly enough to describe that process. So, one of my aspirations for Promptly, which is a platform, we call it Open Table for People. So it's basically payments, scheduling, and promotions for self-employed people. Anyone who sells time or sessions. So it could be a housekeeper, a psychologist. Our goal is to become the brand that all those people who are currently in named sector of the economy that accounts for $2.7 trillion of activity, I want them to think of themselves as promptly users. Like, I'm a promptly user, as opposed to I'm a solopreneur or I'm a self-employed person who sells time by the hour. Those are all things that are really hard to do, so promptly can actually become the brand that they think of that describes what they do as a sort of category set. But as a brand idea, that's a really bizarre brand. If I told you that 10 years ago I was going to start a company that builds software, we're going to become the category brand for self-employed people, you'd be like, this guy's crazy. But today, as I described that, many of you in the audience were like, yeah, it makes sense. Those people don't really have a name. So there's an opportunity there today, as never before, to create brands that encompass far more than they do, but it's also more opportunity to have no brand.
Richard, can I elaborate on that?
Yeah.
Sorry. Oh, almost fell off. Well, I think that kind of segues into, I really like that line of thinking, because what it makes me think of is the process is about what's the strategy of the company. So like you said, in the olden days, you know, okay, let's go have the brand team go off and develop what this brand is, or you hire the design firm, like Tank, and we would go off and do that. But actually what I find is with most clients now, we work with them on defining what the strategy is, and the design might not be the most important part of the strategy. You know, the experience can take on a lot of different lives. It can be the user experience online, or it can be the experience of what that product is, if it's an actual physical product and it's something that you order and it's shipped to your home, what the experience of unwrapping that product is. I think, you know, Apple's a great example of taking on this customer experience all the way to pulling the product out of the box and obviously turning it on. But, you know, I think that Apple's another good example of kind of stripping away the decor that would be traditionally in what you would design as a brand, and letting the product be the life of how you demonstrate what that brand is all about.
So the question was, how do you launch a brand? Right? To me, brand is trust, right? It's equity. So it's almost like saying, how do you get a woman to love you first date? I don't know if it's possible. I think there's an infatuation, right? But the credibility comes from many dates and experience and trust. And to me, that in the digital world is like your Twitter followers, or you know, your engagement, your likes, your traffic, your registered users, how you're growing. Are you growing, right? And so that's, I think, how consumers start to trust you, is other people are looking at you, other people are using you, trust gets developed. If these guys are using this brand, and you know, maybe I'll try it too. And certainly there needs to be a personal sort of connection on usability, and sort of hopefully that narrative needs to connect. But at the end of the day, they're checking you out. You know, 67% of decisions on a brand are made online, right? So if you don't have a website, 52% of small businesses don't have websites. So 67% of people out there are making decisions on whether they do business with you, but 52% of people businesses don't have a website. So there's a huge disconnect there. So the brand is very dynamic. It needs to be growing and moving, right? And so if you're going to launch a brand, I think it's all about being comfortable with taking your time and knowing that you're going to get 10 users, and 10 users will hopefully be 20 users, and then 20 will be 40, and that's geometric, right? It's doubling. So if you look at, I think they talked about the measles or something, there was an outbreak of 15 people. That doesn't sound like a lot of people, but relative to last year it was 2, right? So that is freaking people out. Even though it's only 15, it could easily be 1.5 million, right? So if you look at that 15 number as your measles outbreak, right? And you're like, you know what, my brand is growing because last week there was nobody, this week there's 15. If those 15 people have a positive experience and then they share it to 5 people, now we're looking at 75, right? So the point is, you can quickly grow off of your users liking you, loving you, sharing you, and identifying with you. But to me, the trust factor is what's so important, and that's.
Chuck, I'm disappointed that you don't believe in love at first sight, but we'll move on from there. So Gabriele, your product's all about getting people the content that they want. You described it as the sort of Pandora of everything. Obviously your site is all about how to build up that want for your content, that want for your demand. In launching if you were to be launching your brand again, or just thinking through the brand launch you've gone through, what are a few tips that you have for the audience in actually making their brand?
Well, I think that for digital services or online website, you shouldn't care that much about your brand at the very beginning. Of course, you should try to choose something which in some way represent what you're gonna sell. But then there are your users. Your brand should communicate in some way what you're offering. But then I think building your user base is what really help you, create your brand. Obviously, there are some basic technical, mistakes that I will avoid next time. So, everybody is writing the needs in the wrong way. So, with a capital N or with a space. So, but that's something really basic. You should probably focus on attracting the right users, the right user base, which is what will help you, communicate your value, to others. That's what branding is about. And if you look at some big brands online, some of them didn't have any sense at the beginning, but actually now they are in a word. Think of Google or think of Twitter or something. So I think the service that you provide is what can make can help you really help you build a strong brand in the web space at least.
So Richard, have you done work with both physical as well as online products, and how do you see the two coming together?
That's a great question. So yeah, Razorfish had a rather unknown but quite substantial physical design practice. So we did everything from design. We designed a retail space in a mall that had wall screens, so you would literally go in there and you didn't know what the product that was for sale in the store could be different day to day. And then you basically go in, you experience it, and then you push a button and it would be shipped to your house. We even went so far as to design a gaming device, if you can believe this, which we sold to a company called Pogo, and actually made quite a bit of money on it, bizarrely. I don't think anyone ever actually used this gaming device. But what's interesting about that coming together with, I always hear the question done the other way, which is all this physical design, and now it's all virtual, it's all zeros and ones. How do we interface those two things together? And I think it's interesting to think about the fact that in the old days, to make a product, you had to have a lathe, you had to have mechanical equipment, you had to prototype it with plaster and paint. And today, first of all, you could do it in about a day, what used to take a year to do. But the other thing is that even if it's a physical device, you can print it on a printer. There's 100 places walkable from here that will print something out for you in 3D. So you need to. Yeah, sorry. So what's an interesting challenge is that I think there's no difference now between physical and virtual design. Yeah. No, it's off. I think the battery. Is that it? Oh, much better. Wow.
He keeps turning them.
I keep turning
really?
them off. So what's really interesting is that with the advent of 3D printing and digital technologies sort of happening simultaneously, the differences, the distinctions between physical design, whether it's a little tiny device or prototyping a space, or virtual design, or product design, these have all sort of become very blurry. And there's actually no barriers to anyone entering any of those markets in the same way there were even 10 years ago. And what's great about that is it means far more people, it's democratized the process of creating things. The bad news is it's democratized the process of making things. So gatekeepers like the woman to my right now have 10x more things to look at, and it's harder to tell the differences between these things because often the differences aren't product-based, but they're execution-based. So you have two products. So does anyone use these as cameras? I'm a big snowboarder, so there's this thing called a GoPro. There's actually another company called Contour, which my friend owns, which is actually a far better camera. It's cooler, it looks less dopey within your helmet, the functionality of the camera's better, the resolution's better. I think this battery is actually going as it's going on and on. Okay. So the Contour guys have sold 1/100th of as many cameras. And that's entirely to do with a very talented head of business development at GoPro who went out and did all those syndication deals very early in the process. It's nothing to do with the product, which is less good. It's nothing to do with the experience, which is less good. It's nothing to do with anything other than one person who was really smart at their job. So that execution risk is far greater today because of the democratization of the creative process.
Absolutely. And I'm hoping this is on. Yep. Actually, I have one here, right here, in front of my face. I would have to agree that it's all about the execution, because there are products that I know are probably far superior, but if I don't see them, if it's not executed the right way, I will never know that it's so good to write about. And I hear people all the time say, well, why didn't this person write about me? They're writing about my competitor, and I don't understand why I wasn't included. And it's because going back to digital storytelling and storytelling in general, it's because the way you present yourself to the reporter or to whoever the user, whoever you're presenting yourself to, you don't have your message out there to convey exactly what you are and what people can use you for, then it's going to fall on deaf ears to the user, to the reporter, to anybody else who's paying attention that could possibly be interested in what you have to offer. So, I mean, getting that message right around, and the language right, because language conveys so much, right? I mean, when you write, you use certain words to convey exactly what something is, and helping and putting that together and making sure that you have that message on point and that you deliver it the right way. You know, not just like, come to this weird secret party, you've never heard of these people. Don't ever do that, by the way. It's not a good pitch. You know, making sure that you let the reporter know why this is important for them to be there, why it's important for the user to sign up, and what benefit it is to them is critical.
Thank you. Now I know, Scott, you've done a lot of in-store design, online design. How do you see it coming together?
Well, I think that can we hear?
Mike's going.
Yes, speak loud.
Okay, so I've had experiences where I've taken store environments or customer experiences and brought digital in, very similar to what Richard was talking about, where we actually bring the brand storytelling in to a retail environment to enhance the experience in the store. I was one of the founders of an apparel company out of Portland called Now, that it was a company really rooted in sustainability from all aspects, with product design and development, manufacturing, and even the store environment. And so we really wanted to come up with great ways of telling that story in an environmentally friendly way. And so digital really